Welcome back to Capital Conversations. I'm Marty Owings, and we're pleased now to welcome Sarah Catherine Walker, or I call you Sarah Walker, if you like, from the Second Chance Coalition, and more recently, the Coalition for Impartial Justice. Ms. Walker is also a doctoral student, completing work in sociology, and has been an active lobbyist here at the Capitol for a number of years. Welcome to the program,
Well,
Sarah.
thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Good to have you here. And I remember my first encounter with you was I think you were testifying in committee on behalf of the Second Chance Coalition and felons who you're trying to reintegrate into society. People can find out more about Sarah and her work at sarahcwalker.com, and we'll mention that again later on. Wondering if you could just tell viewers a little bit about the work of the Second Chance Coalition, the Coalition for Impartial Justice.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the Second Chance Coalition. And the Second Chance Coalition has been in operation for about 6 years. And its mission is to advocate to make sure that people who have made mistakes, so people with criminal records, have a chance to redeem themselves and become fully productive members of society. So we largely focus on making sure that individuals have access to housing and employment, and making sure that what we know about people who make mistakes and have criminal records is that they are going to be more successful when, in fact, they have an opportunity to succeed. But right now, what our laws and policies have been doing is putting up barriers at every single juncture. And so one of the things I frequently say is there's nowhere else except our correction and public safety system where we would allow this much failure and continue to do the same thing. And quite frankly, nationally, we spend about $52 billion a year in corrections costs. So what we've been doing is, for a long time, Minnesota, as most people who are watching this are going to know, is they have one of the most active, engaged electorates. We have more days on the Hill than anyone else. And so we came together, I brought together a group of nonprofit advocates, and we decided it was time to raise awareness about this issue. And since then, we've been having a very large lobbying day every year, and we have a policy agenda each year that we follow.
I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned a minute ago. I think in many people's minds, and Americans, Minnesotans, others, when they think of somebody who's committed a crime, gone to jail, served their sentence, they've, quote unquote, paid their debts to society. What you're saying now, and what people maybe don't know about, is that it continues to be punitive long after you've served your prison time or your sentence is up, and even if your probation has expired. Talk about a little bit about what these guys and people or women coming out of jail have to encounter if they want to rebuild their lives. What are they up against?
Well, first, I just want to say I call this entire system a system of perpetual punishment. Yeah. We no longer just send someone to jail or give them a probation sentence and let them end. What we have now is a system in which basically it doesn't matter what part of society you're trying to enter, as I mentioned, for employment or housing. There's so much access to criminal records these days that even if you did something when you were 18 years old and you're 30 years old, have never gotten in trouble again, you have trouble finding a job because that, in fact, will come back to your record. One of the things that I'm most passionate about is an issue called Ban the Box. And in 2009, the Second Chance Coalition passed a law that required public employers to take the question about criminal record off of the initial employment application. Because what we know is that if you check that box on an application, people are likely to throw your application away. And it seems contradictory to me for society to tell someone who made a mistake that we want you to reform your life and be a tax-paying member of society, but then deny them that opportunity. So for the last 2 years, and this year again, we will be pushing to expand that 2009 law to apply to private employers.
Well, I wanted to ask you a more pointed question regarding that. Statistically, I'm sure you're knee-deep, neck-deep in this, but recidivism rates, as the society has changed and it's become more punitive, have the rates of recidivism gone up because these people just can't establish themselves in life and society?
Well, so I think the recidivism question can be complicated, but the reality is Minnesota's correction population has a large recidivism rate.
These are people who reoffend. Recidivism's a big word for
yes. Oh, yes. So
getting in trouble again after you've been in the system.
But there's one thing I like to say about Minnesota that's really different and important to acknowledge than anywhere else in the country. And that is that Minnesota actually has the second smallest prison population in the nation. And so a lot of ways we can be self-congratulatory. We can say, well, that's wonderful. We have a small prison population. We must be doing things right. But we have the 4th highest rate in the United States of individuals on probation. So what we have done is, rather than send people to prison, which is good, but we put them on exceedingly long probationary periods. I can name numerous people of 20, 30-year probation sentences. And the problem is, it
How
means
long?
20, 30 years. It is not uncommon. And these are for nonviolent offenses. And it seems wrong to me to tell someone that you can live in the community and you're safe enough to be in the community, raise your family, hold a job, but we're still going to create all these barriers to make it as difficult as possible for
Yeah.
you. And in addition, one of the other issues, talking about people living in the community, that we will be pushing for is the restoration of voting rights for people who live in the community. And
Right, a
our-
big issue during the voter ID debate and all that stuff.
It is.
They pointed a lot at the people you try to reintegrate into society, saying, see, there's felons who are voting, and that's a no-no and whatnot, so.
Well, and there's a different,
And it is, it's illegal.
It is illegal, but the problem is we've created a really complicated system, and no
They
one,
don't even know when they get out of jail, sometimes they can't vote. They figure, well, I served my time, I'm done with probation, or,
and I can tell you, if you ask public safety professionals, if you ask the judiciary, they often don't understand the law themselves, and so it's a really
wait a minute.
complicated
They
system.
don't even understand the law, and they're,
No, that is true, because
Yeah, I see.
it's not the judge's responsibility necessarily to understand the collateral consequences that affect individuals when they leave the
I
system.
see.
Their job is to sentence the individual.
so they're not reminding them, hey, by the way, when you're done serving your time, don't go vote right away, you wait till you're,
Yep, and
You're
14
done.
other states follow this policy where people who are not in prison can vote. It simplifies
Gotcha.
it saves a lot of money, and it stops people from being prosecuted. The County Attorneys Association actually supports our position, which is often called the North Dakota model. And some people think this is a partisan issue, but if you look at the states who are reenfranchising people and who use this model, there's at least 4 states who are heavily Republican. And most recently, actually, Texas worked to reenfranchise more individuals.
I think they've seen a financial impact. But before we get to your work on the Coalition for Impartial Justice,
Yeah.
I want to talk about the low-level drug offenders filling up prisons. Largely, we're talking about minority and African-American people who are going to jail for really, really long times. And the sentencing rates are quite in contrast with white offenders, et cetera, et cetera. And there's people that still stand up today and say, we don't have any institutional racism.
Yep.
So, but has your study, what is your work, what is the things what have you seen, would that bear that out, that we're good, we don't have any institutional racism, we're all good now? Obama was elected.
Well, that is absolutely true. I think that Obama was elected, and I think that the problem of criminal justice policy and reforming it is that we made really bad policy decisions incrementally over a long period of time. And so in order to fix that, we have to go and attack these small policy decisions that accumulated over time. And, it has been, right now, everyone's used to me having a second chance to stand the Hill. But
Right.
before that, I think people thought it was a little bit of a crazy idea.
Right.
But it's received more attention. But in terms of drug offenders, so Minnesota does not actually incarcerate in a prison very many drug dealers.
Low-level drug
Low-level
offenders.
drug offenders. And that's one of the things we do well again.
Well, we're one of the few states that doesn't do that, right?
No, but
that's-
clearly, if you look at the crack cocaine sentencing with crack and cocaine disparities,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I mean, that was a clear example of whether it was consciously a racial decision, but it is something that became institutionalized and had a huge effect on the African American population. And in fact, when you look at studies of who uses drugs, basically drug rates among African American and Caucasians is almost identical, except African Americans use slightly more crack and whites use slightly more cocaine.
cocaine, right.
But other than that, the drug use is the same. Part of the reasons African Americans get picked up more is because of their geographic location. People who live in urban areas tend to deal drugs outside because they're in more confined areas. When you're in the suburbs, you're going to drive your car to someone's house. So it's also easier to pick people up who are doing this. And so do I think necessarily it's a conscious effort? But the problem is, once you actually start arresting more people, then of course it gets considered a more dangerous neighborhood. They end up with the consequences of cycling through the system.
I think you're being very kind to the system right now, considering one statistic I read not long ago, Michelle's book on
The New Jim Crow.
The New Jim Crow, 1 in 9 African Americans between the age of 19 and 28 is in prison right now.
Oh, I will tell you, I mean, I think it's outrageous, and the
That's-
reason I got into this work was
That's
to
really
address.
devastating to the societal infrastructure, the family system, everything, right?
So I mean, some people don't recognize this, but you know, I'm African American, and so when I actually came to Minnesota to go to Carleton, and when I was there, what made me work on this, and I've never worked on any other issue, is that I was trying to figure out where I could have the most impact in addressing racial disparities. And what I looked at was that the criminal justice system has become the nexus of all of the social and racial inequalities.
Yeah.
It's where people go when our mental health systems have failed, our education systems have failed. So unfortunately, what I've decided was that, first of all, it had the most stigma. A lot of people don't want to work on it. But the next thing is that as long as we allow the criminal justice system to be the place of last resort, it will continue to be.
Right.
So we have to stop saying that we can send people to prison because our other systems aren't working.
Which leads which is a good segue into this Coalition for Impartial Justice. Tell me about the work there. What is the problem that we're trying to address there, you're trying to address, and what's going on with that?
Well, this is how I'm going to describe the problem first, is I actually grew up in Texas. And for anyone who's ever been to Texas or lived out or even Wisconsin, one of the things you will be accustomed to if you watch television is judicial advertisements. So people campaigning to be a judge. And I think it's really damaging because, one, it's not a way to provide good information about the candidates. What generally ends up happening is they focus on salacious stories that are actually often racialized, because they'll use a crime story to say this candidate ran against this.
Judge Joe prosecuted the big drug offender, yeah.
Exactly, and I
Absolutely,
don't
yeah.
think that's productive. I don't think that moves us to a good place of impartiality in the courts. And it makes the larger community not trust the court system, and certainly the African American community. But in addition to that, if you are in Texas and you need to find an attorney, one of the first things you want to know is whether or not that attorney has donated to that judicial campaign. And I think that is a travesty.
They don't track that now.
There is tracking of that, but you know,
It's not widely known, or
it's just so
you're not an offender who's going to go Google that,
Well,
right?
here's the thing, it's so commonplace that every
Yeah.
firm is donating to every candidate that it's just
I
not
see.
seen as problematic. If
So you would eliminate that?
Well, this is how we would do it. So the
Yeah.
other problem is, if, you know, I get asked a lot of questions, probably as you do, around Election Day about what do you think of this candidate. But the number one question I get asked, outside of whether you can vote if you're a felon, is who are the judicial candidates?
Yeah.
We have no real way to find any information out. And I will tell you that I've worked with the courts and the judiciary for a long time, and I have a close friend who's a judge, and I had a number of staff who were having issues with this judge. He knows I tell the story, and I was surprised because it was contrary to how I knew him. And finally, I called him up on the phone, and I said, you know, why are you treating my staff so poorly? They come back crying, and he wasn't very happy when I called. And it never occurred to me that I thought I was treating him like a colleague. And rather than that, he wasn't happy. We hung up. He called me back 2 weeks later and told me I was the first person in 2 terms on the bench who had ever given him feedback about how he did on how he was performing. And I think that's unnatural because there's a huge power dynamic.
Well, people think judges have the final word because guess what? They usually do, and they can put you into jail for a long time.
What is, and so attorneys don't want to bring things forward.
Yeah,
So we have
sure.
a proposal, and it's a constitutional amendment, and we've been working on it. The coalition, I've been the president for 3 years, but the coalition has been around for about 6 years, and it was actually grew out of the Cui Commission. It has 3 components. It would actually require mandatory merit selection at all levels.
Yeah.
It would also provide for a public performance evaluation, so we'd have a way
What
to
is
provide.
merit selection? Sorry to cut you off. What is that? I've heard that talked about a lot.
So merit selection, it was actually instituted by Governor Cui, and what it does is it means that the governor gets, from a merit selection committee,
Yeah.
gets given 5 candidates after they're vetted, and the governor is supposed to select one of those 5 candidates. So rather than just picking a political crony or whoever your friend is on the, you know, who's an attorney, you actually get a geographically diverse group of people
Okay.
to make the decision, and some of them are non-attorneys. So that'd be the first component. The second component is this public performance evaluation commission that would rate judges qualified, unqualified, or not qualified. And then from there, that information would be made available to the public. Now, this is not to say we don't have a decent judiciary compared to a place like Texas, quite frankly, but the reality is what is the purpose of having an election if we don't have any meaningful information in which to make a
Yeah.
decision? And then the final component is moving away from a system of contested elections to a retention election system. And this is what Iowa does. We actually, rather than actually having an opponent, you would just vote yes or no, retain or don't retain this judge. And there's two reasons. One, it gives the individual 100% of the time they can hold a judge accountable. And the other reason is because really, in reality, we have no meaningful way to vote on judges if we do have a bad judge. Over
Right.
90% of judges run unopposed. So what we've done is they have no evaluation, but yet they maintain a 100, basically they have permanent lifetime security without having any way to actually consider improving themselves.
Well, I'm getting a signal from my producer that we have to wrap up pretty soon, but let me ask you this. What can you do in your lobbying work at the legislature to help influence outcomes in these areas as far as, you know, impartiality on the bench and then this, the Second Chance Coalition or reintegrating felons?
There's two quick things. One
Or
is
just offenders, because you don't even have to be a felon. You get a gross misdemeanor and boom.
I consider them all offenders. So
Yes, right.
there's two things I think I hope to be able to do. And number one is I hope to continue. We've never passed anything that's not bipartisan in either coalition or made progress. I still think we need bipartisan support.
Right.
The second thing I hope to do is the Capitol isn't the most diverse place in the world, and especially when it comes to the lobbying circles. And so I think a lot of organizations who are working on behalf of disenfranchised populations often just can't keep up with the information flow and know when bills are coming. So I hope that one of the things I can do is help push that information out into the
Yeah.
community by being here more often.
Over 3,000 bills last session alone introduced. So yeah, hard as a reporter, hard as a lobbyist, hard as a citizen to keep up with what's going on. Appreciate your insights, Sarah Walker, and the work that you do. I mean, you're trying to, you know, change the system, which is not an easy thing to do. And, you know, you're a lobbyist, I understand. You do it for a living and you enjoy it, but boy, I don't know, it seems like hard work. And
This is I don't get paid for any of the work I do on either of those coalitions. It's all volunteer.
all volunteer work.
100%
Okay,
volunteer.
okay. And your lobbying efforts, those are the same?
No, I've been lobbying. I just changed. I was the chief operating officer at a large nonprofit that
Okay.
worked with offenders for the last 6 years, and I've always worked in the field.
What's the name of that organization?
180 degrees.
That's right. I read the new CEO's bio the other day. Okay.
Yep. And so now I've just moved on, and part of the reason is because what I really did feel as though we were hindered by not having a larger presence at the Capitol.
Yeah. More people can find out more by visiting sarahcwalker.com. That's SARAH, the letter C, Walker, WALKER.com. Go there, learn more about Second Chance Coalition and the Coalition for Impartial Justice, and find out how you can help, if you like, to support those various efforts and get to know Sarah. She's got a big bio on there and tell you all about her. Fascinating. Thank you for being our
Thank
guest
you
tonight,
so
Sarah.
much. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely, ours too. That's all we have time for tonight. Don't forget to tune in next week when we'll be joined by Democrat Ryan Winkler and Republican Steve Draskowski. Both are House members, plus our regular political panel returns with Sarah Janicek, Mitch Berg, and reporter Brianna Birschbach from Politics in Minnesota. They'll break down the early session action and maybe even give us a few predictions. We'd like to thank our special guests, Senators Jeff Hayden and Representative Tony Cornish, for joining us, and of course Sarah Walker from the Second Chance Coalition and the Coalition for Impartial Justice. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at MNCap News and on Facebook at Minnesota Capitol Conversations. If you send us a good question, we'll ask it on the show. Really, we will. And we love to hear from you, so leave us those notes. Cliff Dahlberg will get back to you, and we'll be able to get that on the air. For more political news and analysis from the Capitol, tune in every Wednesday at 7:40 a.m. to KFAI's Morning Blend on 90.3 FM, and check out Minnesota Capitol News at mncapitalnews.com. We had production assistance tonight from Cliff Dahlberg. Our associate producers were Matt Ealing and Catherine Loudenslager. For my co-host Paul Gardner, who couldn't be here tonight, I'm Marty Owings. We'll see you at the Capitol.